Hi, I'm Ryan Singer, and this is the fourth video in our series about how we work. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what happens within the cycle. How does the team kind of track what they're doing, and how do they work on the right things so that they actually get done by the end of the cycle? So for a quick bit of review, the teams are working in 6-week cycles, and they're integrated. So we've got one UI designer, one or two programmers, QA, and they're self-managed. They've been deliberately allocated. So they're only working on this project for this 6 weeks, and nobody can interrupt them and pull them away to work on something else. And anything else that needs to happen has also been deliberately allocated. So there's a budget and a team for something else that needs to be happening so that they're not interrupted. And the team is working on building some version of a concept, not a spec, right? And they have variable scope. So they're not just kind of building something that's already been defined. They're also shaping it and figuring out what it should be and making cuts. So what we're going to talk about here is the hill chart, which is the tool that we use to track progress through the cycle in a very different way. And then we're also going to look at how the hill chart enables us to do asynchronous management. So how do we kind of make decisions and figure out kind of where to take turns along the way without having to keep interrupting everybody to sync up for meetings. All right, so let's get into this. To start off with, let's talk about how we think about work. And then this is going to frame us up to see what the hill chart is keeping track of. So the kind of natural way that we often think about work is that there's a set of tasks, and each task has a certain amount of effort or time it's going to take to do it. And if we know all the tasks and we know all the time and effort it's going to take for each one, then it's a little bit like moving a pile of stones from A to B. We can just do the math and multiply it, and we have some expectation of how long it's going to take. Now, this is kind of what you see with things like story points and a lot of traditional metrics. So this would work if we had perfect information up front about the tasks, right? But we don't unless we're doing the exact same work over and over again. Here, we're building new features, we're making changes we've never made to the code before. So our work is more like creative work, it's problem-solving work. And when you do that kind of work, work isn't linear labor, it's more like a hill. So there's an uphill phase where you actually figure out what the work even is. You know, you might know kind of what you're supposed to do, but the question of how you're actually going to do it, I mean, that's something else, right? So we actually have to roll up our sleeves and start to get into the code to see kind of how things are already built or what's going to be possible there. Or with a design, you have to start moving things around to actually see how am I going to make this work, right? So there's an uphill phase full of unknowns and uncertainty and problem solving. And then you reach a point where you get to the top of the hill. That's where you've figured out your approach, you've eliminated all the major unknowns, you don't have any of that kind of feeling in your stomach of like, not sure how I'm going to handle that when that happens, that sort of a thing. And you can see all the edges of the work, you can see down the other side. And that's when you have certainty, and the work becomes more like that linear labor. When it's more like, okay, this is what's left, this is what we have to do, this is what we have to knock out. And then you can say, there's this many tasks and whatever. It'll be done in 3 days or a week or something like that. So tracking the number of tasks that are left or tracking what's done and what's not done isn't as important as tracking what's known and what's not known, or tracking what's solved and what's not solved yet. So what we're talking about here is that journey from unknown to known, and then from known to done. That's really what we want to be paying attention to. And the way that we do that is with this tool called the hill chart. So here we've got a project in Basecamp, and these are the to-do lists, and each to-do list has a dot with a color, and these are getting plotted on the hill. And these are kind of manually positioned by people. And in this case, we've got a handful of scopes of work that they haven't even cracked open yet on the left. And on the right, there's a few things that have already been solved, and it's just a matter of execution to finish these things. So a couple questions came up from the first video. People were asking, how do you know what to do when you reach the end of a 6-week cycle and the project isn't done? Like, do you extend it or what do you do? And now we can give a clear answer to that. There's been cases where a project was at the end of the cycle and it wasn't finished, but all the work was here on the right side. So If the work is on the downhill slope, then there's not a lot of risk. We know that the uncertainty has been worked out, that there aren't open problems, and it's just a matter of execution. So if something like that happens, it's very reasonable to say, okay, we'll give this another few days or another week or whatever needs to happen there. If the work that's left over is on the uphill side, now that's something different because that means that there's an unsolved problem. And problem solving is totally different than just task execution. So we might have something that we don't know how to do, and it could take months for us to have the stroke of insight or the eureka or whatever to solve the problem. So it's very risky, and it's not. We shouldn't expect that if we just give it a little more time, then we're going to have the aha moment, right? So if we have a project, this has happened a couple times where we get to the end and there's still a substantial unsolved problem. That's not likely to get an extension. That means that there's a deeper issue, and we're going to have to probably table the work. So that's the kind of deeper conversation and deeper insight that we can have when we look at the progress in terms of problem solving. So and that's also what we want the team to be thinking about through the project. And this is kind of how that looks. So we can actually see a history of snapshots over time. Here we've got the beginning of the project at the bottom, and as we go up, this is forward in time. So here we can see the team picked off a couple scopes, and they did some spiking of UI and development to push these uphill. And then as the days go by, these start to reach the top of the hill, and we can go forward in time, and then we can see these already start to get over the hill and to the other side. And now this is really cool to see because, like we've talked about, the team started the whole cycle with a concept and not a spec. So we were kind of making a bet that the details are going to work themselves out somehow and that the team's going to figure out kind of what the right way to do this is. And here we can actually see problem solving. We can see the team solving problems over time. And this is already just in the first few days of the project. So this is giving us that confidence, like, yeah, this is actually working. The things that we know what these things mean, and they're actually getting done and solved. So this is much more meaningful than seeing just some tasks getting checked off. Now, there's one thing that I should probably point out here. Here, we're going to look at, this is an individual list, and this is just kind of the progress over time for this one list. These dots are placed manually according to feel by a person. So this isn't an algorithm. This isn't some function of, how many tasks are left. In this case, this list has only a single item left, but it's not at the bottom of the hill. So what does that mean? Well, it could mean that there's quite a bit of work in this item. It could mean that they just got the item over the hill and they just haven't really thought about it more. So this is just an indication of sort of what they know as of right now. It could be that they expect a lot more tasks to go into the list here, but they don't have any unknowns that are bothering them, right? So there could be somebody has a personal to-do list of tasks they haven't added. So if we want to know kind of what's going on here, we could just post a comment and say, is there a lot of work here? Or if there's time in the cycle, we could kind of back off a little bit, and then we could just watch the snapshots over time. And then maybe the next day we see this thing shoots down to the bottom, or maybe we see it stay where it is, but the tasks populate more, right? And then we can tell what's going on like that. So we're able now to flip back to our map. We've talked about the hill chart, and the hill chart is helping us to track uncertainty. And the hill chart is showing progress in a way that allows us to manage asynchronously. So let me show you what that means here. Anybody can come in and look at this and instantly get a lot of context about what's actually going on in the project. Normally, to have this kind of qualitative kind of feeling for where the project really stands, we'd have to synchronize everybody up and have a meeting together. And then we'd have to have kind of detailed conversations about, well, where's this and where's that, because looking at to-do lists doesn't tell you that. And just by coming in here and looking at the snapshots, we might be able to have a conversation like this. I could say, this migration scope that's on the left side, maybe I'm nervous about that. And I think there might be some really big issues kind of hiding in that. So we could have a conversation just through comments on Basecamp saying, hey, these things are solved. Should we take a pause and just park these where they are because they're on the downslope, and kind of refocus our attention right now over on pushing migration uphill? Because maybe we should push that uphill and then we can remove that uncertainty. And then once that uncertainty is gone, we can go back to execution and pushing everything down. That's a very high level strategic conversation about what matters, where our focus should be, and kind of where the project really stands, that we can now have asynchronously. And having it asynchronously it's not just a time saver kind of in terms of the time spent on the meeting, but having everybody go to the meeting itself is a big interruption. So everybody, no matter where they are, would have to stop at the same time. Somebody who has a question would need to queue it up for the meeting, right? And then everyone interrupts what they're doing to have this conversation. When we're doing it asynchronously, whoever has some work that got done, they can go in here, move something to show that progress was made. Then when somebody else has a free moment, they can come in and see that progress was made. Somebody else who's curious about the state of the project can come in and say, hey, what about migration, right? And all of this high-level status conversation is happening in the cracks of each person's schedule. So this is an amazing time savings, which is really helpful, especially when you have kind of a smaller window of time like this 6-week window. So this is really powerful. So we'll stop there in this video. We've taken a look at the hill chart, and we've seen how it allows us to track uncertainty, so from unknown to known to done, instead of just whether tasks are checked off or not. And it allows us to see the progress in a way that allows management to happen asynchronously without regularly scheduled meetings. So after this, we can take a look in the next video about kind of what are these different pieces of work. So how do we break work into separate scopes? And what do we do when we get stuck? How do we debug those different scopes of work? And how does the hill chart enable us to do that? So that'll come in the next video.